The sky didn't darken gradually. It snapped. One moment, the world was normal. Traffic crawling through crowded streets, people glued to their phones, planes cutting white scars across the blue. The next moment, the light vanished as if something enormous had swallowed the sun whole. At first, people thought it was an eclipse. Then the screaming started. A shadow stretched across entire continents, too sharp, too sudden to be natural. Birds dropped mid-flight. Power grids flickered. Satellites went silent. And high above, something impossible revealed itself. Not one object, but thousands. Ships. Not drifting. Not arriving slowly. They were already there. Hanging. Watching. Every screen on Earth, phones, televisions, billboards, glitched at the exact same time. Static bled into a single image, a shape no human language could properly describe. Angles that hurt to look at. Surfaces that seemed to move even when they were still. Then a sound came. Not through speakers. Not through air. Inside people's heads. A pulse. A pressure. A presence. Humanity froze. For 3 long seconds, the entire planet held its breath. Then the message came. It wasn't words. Not exactly. More like meaning forced directly into the brain. Cold, precise, undeniable. You are not alone. Panic erupted instantly. Cars crashed. Crowds stampeded. Planes diverted midair without explanation. Governments scrambled. Leaders rushed into bunkers. Military commands lit up across every nation. Emergency sirens wailed as confusion spread faster than any disaster in history. But the ships didn't move. They didn't attack. They just watched. Hours passed. Then 12. Then 24. The silence became worse than fear. Because something was wrong. If this was an invasion, why wait? If this was first contact, why no communication? Astronomers, scientists, and defense analysts all came to the same conclusion. Quietly, reluctantly. This wasn't a greeting. It was an assessment. Humanity was being studied. Across the globe, data streams were intercepted. The objects in orbit were scanning everything. Communications, infrastructure, weapon systems, even human biology. Hospitals reported strange interference. Military satellites were overridden like toys. Nothing could hide. And the most terrifying part? There was nothing anyone could do about it. Missiles were prepared, submarines positioned, nuclear launch codes verified. Every major power reached the same breaking point. Strike first. Or wait. No one wanted to be the one who triggered extinction. But fear makes decisions. At exactly 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated, a single missile launched. No country claimed it. It tore through the atmosphere, guided by humanity's most advanced targeting systems, aimed directly at one of the hovering ships. For a moment, just a moment, hope sparked. Maybe they could be hurt. Maybe they weren't gods. The missile made contact. And vanished. No explosion. No impact. Just gone. As if it had never existed. That's when the ships moved. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just enough. A subtle shift in formation, like predators adjusting their stance before the hunt. The message was clear, even without words. We saw that. We allowed that. Do not try again. But humanity had already crossed the line. Fighter jets were scrambled from multiple continents. Pilots reported the same thing. Instrument failure, visual distortion, systems shutting down mid-flight. Some planes fell from the sky. Others turned back, not by choice, but because their controls simply stopped responding. The ships didn't fire. They didn't need to. They were demonstrating control. Absolute control. By the second day, governments stopped pretending they had answers. Public broadcasts became fragmented, uncertain. Some urged calm. Others prepared for the worst. Conspiracy theories exploded. Religions declared prophecy fulfilled, and millions of people simply waited. Because deep down, everyone felt it. This wasn't random. This wasn't chaos. This was deliberate. And then, on the third day, the silence ended. The ships descended. Not all at once. One by one. Massive structures breaking through cloud layers, casting shadows over entire cities. New York, Tokyo, London, Delhi, Lagos. Every major population center was chosen with terrifying precision. People ran. Some prayed. Some recorded. Because even at the end of the world, humanity needed to witness it. The first ship reached low atmosphere above New York City. It stopped, hovered, and for a moment, everything went still again. No wind, no sound, just that impossible shape hanging over millions of lives. Then the bottom of the ship opened. Light poured out, not bright, not blinding, but wrong. It bent as it moved, twisting through the air like it didn't belong in this universe. And from that light, something began to emerge. Not machines, not drones. Something alive. The invasion had begun, and humanity realized, far too late. This wasn't about conquering territory. This was about testing a species. And Earth was the experiment. No one fired first. That was the most terrifying part. As the first alien forms descended into New York, the world watched in frozen silence. Every live stream, every news channel, every shaking phone camera captured the same impossible moment from different angles. The creatures didn't rush. They didn't attack wildly. They moved with calm precision, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. They already knew how this would end. The first contact lasted exactly 11 seconds. A group of civilians, trapped in the streets below, didn't run. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe fear rooted them in place. Maybe, deep down, they believed this might still be peaceful. One of the beings approached. Tall, unnaturally thin. Its body seemed to shift as it moved, like it wasn't fully solid. No eyes, no face, just a smooth surface that reflected the world in warped fragments. It reached out. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the people were gone. Not burned, not crushed, erased. The space they stood in became empty, like they had been cut out of reality itself. That was the moment the world broke. Every military force on Earth received the same order within seconds. Engage. Fighter jets screamed across the skies. Missiles launched in coordinated waves. Anti-air systems lit up cities like war zones. Humanity didn't hesitate anymore. We fought. The first explosions hit the descending ships with enough force to level mountains. Fire bloomed across the sky, shock waves rippling through clouds. For a brief, desperate moment, it looked like it might be working. Then the fire cleared. The ships were untouched. Not damaged. Not scratched. Untouched. And then they responded. A pulse of light spread outward from the ships. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable. It washed over aircraft, missiles, buildings, everything in its path. Jets dropped instantly. Missiles fell harmlessly from the sky. Entire defense systems shut down mid-command, screens going black as if power had never existed. Cities went dark. Across the globe, the same scene repeated. London lasted 4 minutes. Tokyo lasted 6. Washington, D.C. lasted less than 3. Every major defense network collapsed like it had been designed to fail. It didn't matter how advanced, how prepared, how classified, none of it worked. Humanity's greatest weapons were meaningless, and the aliens still hadn't truly attacked. That realization came too late, because then they started. It began in silence. A single beam, thin, almost invisible, extended from one of the ships hovering above New York. It touched the ground gently, like a finger brushing dust. Then the city disappeared. Not exploded. Not destroyed. Gone. Buildings, streets, people, millions of lives, vanished in less than a second. Where New York had stood was now an empty scar, perfectly smooth, like the earth itself had been rewritten. No debris. No survivors. Nothing. The world watched it happen in real time. And still, there was no warning. No message. No demand. Just execution. Panic turned into something worse. Despair. Because this wasn't a war. Wars had rules. Strategies. Weaknesses. This was something else entirely. Other cities followed. Not randomly. Carefully chosen. Strategically erased. Shanghai. Paris. Sao Paulo. Cairo. Each one removed with the same cold precision, as if someone was crossing names off a list. Governments collapsed within hours. Communication lines fractured. Some leaders tried to organize resistance, others disappeared entirely. Militaries kept fighting, not because they believed they could win, but because stopping meant accepting extinction. And humanity refused to accept that. On the ground, something unexpected began to happen. Survivors adapted. Soldiers abandoned standard tactics. Civilians formed evacuation chains without orders. Engineers repurposed broken tech into makeshift defenses. People stopped waiting for instructions. They acted. Not effectively. Not successfully. But relentlessly. In one destroyed city, a group of survivors managed to ambush a lone alien unit. They used nothing advanced, just explosives, timing, and sheer desperation. The blast didn't kill the creature, but it staggered. For the first time, one of them reacted. That single moment changed everything, because it proved something impossible. They weren't invincible. The footage spread instantly across what remained of the global network. Grainy, chaotic, but clear enough. The alien had moved, like it felt something. Damage, pain, it didn't matter. It was enough. Hope didn't return, but something else did. Defiance. Across the world, small groups began trying the same thing. Hit fast. Hit close. Never stop moving. Most failed. Entire teams were wiped out in seconds. But not all. A pattern started forming. The aliens were superior in every way. Technology, strategy, control. But they weren't used to resistance like this. Humans didn't retreat when they should. Didn't surrender when it made sense. Didn't stop when survival was impossible. And the aliens noticed. High above the burning remains of Earth, their formations shifted again. Not in preparation, in recalculation. Because something about this species wasn't aligning with their expectations. This wasn't how prey behaved. And for the first time since their arrival, the invaders hesitated. The hesitation didn't last long, but humanity noticed it. And that was enough. Because for the first time since the sky had split open, the invaders had done something imperfect. It was small, barely measurable, but it existed. Their movements weren't as fluid. Their responses weren't as immediate. They were adjusting, which meant they hadn't expected this. On the ground, that realization spread faster than fear ever had. Not through governments, they were barely functioning now, but through people. Soldiers shared it over broken comms. Survivors passed it by word of mouth. Hackers forced fragments of footage across failing networks. The message was simple. They can be resisted, not defeated. Not yet. But resisted. And humanity, as it always had, took that thin line and turned it into something stronger. In the ruins of what had once been Chicago, a group of engineers and former military personnel set up what they called a dead zone. Using scavenged equipment, damaged signal disruptors, and pure guesswork, they created an area where alien scans became inconsistent. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. For 6 minutes, the aliens couldn't see clearly inside it. 6 minutes was all humans needed. Strike teams moved in and out of the zone, launching hit-and-run attacks on isolated alien units. They didn't try to hold ground. They didn't try to win. They just kept hitting. In Mumbai, civilians turned subway tunnels into labyrinths, confusing alien patrols and forcing them into tight spaces where their mobility meant less. In Berlin, a group of medics began tracking something no one had considered before: patterns in the wounded. Because there were wounded. Rare, but real. The creatures didn't bleed the way humans did, but after certain attacks, their movements became slower, less precise. Some even retreated. That word spread carefully. Retreated. Not advanced. Not adapted. Retreated. It wasn't fear. Not yet. But it wasn't dominance anymore either. The invaders responded the only way they knew how. They escalated. Ships lowered closer to the surface. Patrol units increased. Entire regions were wiped out faster, as if the aliens were trying to regain control through sheer overwhelming force. But something had already changed. Humans didn't break. Every time a city fell, survivors from other regions adapted faster. Every time a new alien tactic appeared, someone somewhere figured out a way to survive it just a little longer. The timeline the invaders expected was collapsing. They had calculated humanity as a species that would panic, fracture, and surrender once superiority was clear. Instead, they got something else. A species that fought harder the more impossible the situation became. In what remained of northern Canada, a small reconnaissance team made a discovery that shifted everything. An alien unit, alone, damaged, and inactive. Not dead. Dormant. Its surface flickered unevenly, its form unstable, like whatever held it together was failing. They didn't destroy it. They captured it. The operation cost them almost everything. Half the team died getting close. 2 more were lost transporting it. But they succeeded. For the first time in human history, an alien was taken. Alive. The news spread in fragments, but its impact was massive, because it proved something even more important than resistance. The invaders weren't just vulnerable. They were limited. Back in the makeshift labs hidden deep underground, scientists worked without rest. No proper tools. No complete data. Just instinct, observation, and desperation. They studied the creature's structure, its reactions, its energy patterns. And what they found didn't make sense. The alien wasn't built for chaos. Its entire design, its movements, its responses, even the way it reacted to damage, was based on precision, predictability, control. It didn't adapt the way humans did. It recalculated. There was a difference. A massive one. Because recalculation required time. And humans didn't give time. Guerrilla attacks intensified across the planet. Not coordinated. Not unified. But constant. Relentless. A convoy destroyed here. A patrol ambushed there. A ship forced to reposition because of unexpected interference. Individually, none of it mattered. Together, it became something the aliens hadn't planned for. Pressure. Not enough to stop them, but enough to slow them. And slowing down an unstoppable force changes everything. High above Earth, inside structures no human would ever see, alien command systems processed the data, over and over, running calculations, adjusting probabilities, trying to understand. But one variable refused to stabilize: human behavior. There was no pattern that held, no prediction that remained accurate. The more they observed, the less sense it made. Why continue attacking when survival chances dropped below zero? Why risk everything for minor gains? Why return to battle after injury? It wasn't logical. It wasn't efficient. It was something else. And that something was spreading. Even as entire regions of Earth fell silent, the resistance didn't shrink. It grew. Not in numbers, but in intensity. Because now, humanity wasn't just reacting. It was learning. And for the first time since the invasion began, the aliens weren't the only ones studying their enemy. The shift was subtle. So subtle that, at first, even the aliens didn't recognize it. But it was there. Buried deep within their calculations, hidden beneath layers of probability models and predictive algorithms, something new had appeared, an inconsistency they couldn't eliminate. A margin of error. Small. Growing. Dangerous. At the beginning of the invasion, their projections had been flawless. Every human response had fallen within expected parameters: panic, disorganization, collapse. Entire civilizations reduced to silence exactly when predicted. But now, the numbers were changing. Operations that should have taken minutes were taking hours. Regions marked as neutralized were becoming active again. Targets previously erased were somehow resisting. It didn't make sense. So they recalculated. Again, and again, and again. But the results only got worse. Because the problem wasn't their math. It was the enemy. On the surface of Earth, humanity had stopped behaving like a species on the brink of extinction. It started behaving like something far more dangerous. Something that refused to follow rules. In the ruins of what had once been Istanbul, an alien strike unit moved through the shattered remains of the city. Their objective was simple: eliminate residual life signs, ensure complete erasure, move on. A routine operation. One they had performed hundreds of times across countless worlds. It should have taken less than 4 minutes. Instead, it never finished. The first unit disappeared without a trace. No signal loss. No damage report. Just gone. The second unit advanced to investigate. That was their first mistake. The humans had learned. They didn't engage directly anymore. They didn't waste energy trying to overpower something stronger. They changed the battlefield. Collapsed structures were rigged to fall at precise moments. Narrow pathways forced alien units into confined spaces. Signal interference distorted their coordination just enough to create hesitation. And humans struck only when that hesitation appeared. Fast. Brutal. Then gone. By the time the third alien unit arrived, there was nothing left but empty streets and broken stone. 3 units lost. To a city that had already been declared dead. High above, the ships adjusted their formations again. But this time, the movement wasn't smooth. It wasn't confident. It was cautious. Because something new had entered the system. Risk. In their command structures, the aliens did not feel fear the way humans did. There was no racing heart, no instinct to run. But they understood threat. And for the first time since their arrival on Earth, threat levels were rising. Reports flooded their network. Units encountering unexpected resistance. Targets reappearing after elimination. Patterns that refused to stabilize. And something else. Something far more concerning. Human persistence beyond logical limits. In one recorded engagement, a human soldier, critically injured, survival probability less than 2%, continued fighting for over 17 minutes. 17 minutes beyond what should have been possible. In another, a group of civilians without weapons managed to delay an alien advance by simply refusing to retreat, forcing the invaders to divert resources to remove them. Inefficient. Illogical. But effective. The aliens processed these events the only way they could. As anomalies. But the anomalies kept increasing. Until they weren't anomalies anymore. They were a pattern. And patterns meant something had been misunderstood. Deep within their analytical systems, a new directive began to form. Re-evaluation of species. Human. Classification. Pending. Because prey no longer fit. On Earth, the change became visible. Alien units started moving differently. Slower. More deliberate. They avoided certain areas entirely. Zones where resistance activity had spiked beyond expected levels. They weren't retreating. But they weren't advancing blindly anymore either. They were adapting. And that alone should have been enough to terrify humanity. But instead, it did the opposite. Because if the invaders had to adapt, it meant they weren't in control anymore. In the underground networks connecting survivors across continents, a new idea began to spread. Not hope. Not victory. Something sharper. Pressure. Humans didn't need to win. They just needed to push. Constantly. Relentlessly. Every second the aliens spent recalculating was a second they weren't advancing. Every unexpected attack forced them to reconsider. Every loss, even a small one, stacked against them. Not physically, but mentally. Strategically. Because for a species built on perfect prediction, uncertainty was a weakness, and humans were becoming the embodiment of it. In one final report transmitted across the alien command network, a conclusion was reached. Not unanimous, but unavoidable. Humanity could not be processed as a standard target. Their behavior exceeded all known models. Their resistance continued beyond acceptable thresholds. And most critically, their response to extinction was not surrender. It was escalation. The recommendation followed. Update classification. Not prey. Not resource. Something else. Something far more dangerous. For the first time in their recorded history of conquest, The invaders did not see Earth as just another world. They saw it as a problem. And problems could spread. Because if one species could behave like this, what if others learned? The calculations spiraled outward, no longer confined to a single planet. And that's when the realization fully formed. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was a risk to their entire system. Down on Earth, humanity didn't know any of this. They didn't see the reports, didn't hear the recalculations, didn't understand the shift happening above them. All they knew was simple. The enemy had changed, which meant one thing. They were feeling it. Not fear, not yet, but something close. And for humanity, that was enough. Because once your enemy starts to hesitate, you've already begun to win. The final shift didn't happen on Earth. It happened above it. Far beyond the burning skies, inside the silent structures of the alien fleet, something unprecedented unfolded. For the first time since their species began expanding across the stars, their unified system, perfect, precise, unquestioned, reached a conclusion it had never reached before. The invasion was no longer efficient. That alone should have been impossible. Every calculation still showed overwhelming superiority. Every measurable factor still placed humans at a disadvantage, so extreme it bordered on absurd. The outcome, by all known logic, remained unchanged. Humanity should have already been gone. And yet, it wasn't. Not only had the species survived initial contact, it had done something far worse from the invaders' perspective. It had endured. Across the planet, resistance zones still burned with activity. Entire regions marked as erased continued to produce interference. Human forces, fragmented and uncoordinated, somehow maintained constant pressure on a system designed to eliminate them within days. The projections didn't match reality anymore, so the system adapted. It expanded its parameters. It redefined the problem, and what it found changed everything. Humans weren't fighting to win. They weren't even fighting to survive. They were fighting because they refused to stop. That single variable, irrational persistence, could not be predicted, contained, or neutralized within acceptable resource limits. For the first time, the cost of victory exceeded the value of conquest. That conclusion triggered something deeper than strategy. It triggered caution. On Earth, the signs appeared slowly. Alien ships began pulling back, just slightly, not retreating, but repositioning beyond the range of constant interference. Ground units became less aggressive, focusing on defense rather than expansion. Entire cities, once marked for immediate erasure, were skipped. At first, humans didn't understand. Then they realized. The pattern had reversed. The invaders weren't advancing anymore. They were stabilizing, containing, trying to control something that refused to be controlled. In the shattered remains of Sao Paulo, a group of survivors watched as a massive alien ship, one that had hovered above them for days, rose back into the clouds without firing a single shot. No attack, no destruction, just distance. The message wasn't spoken, but humanity understood it anyway. This was no longer a hunt. This was a standoff. High above, the final decision was made, not out of fear, but out of calculation. Humanity was no longer a viable target, not because it was strong, not because it was advanced, but because it was unpredictable in a way that threatened the system itself. A species that refused to follow the rules of survival could not be safely conquered. Orders spread through the fleet. gradual disengagement, minimize losses, avoid prolonged exposure. Earth was no longer worth it. One by one, the ships began to leave. Not in panic, not in defeat, but in something far more telling: reluctance. Because even as they withdrew, their systems continued to analyze, to process, to understand what had happened. And the conclusion never changed. Humans were not dangerous because of their technology, not because of their strategy, but because of something far more difficult to measure. They didn't break, even when everything told them they should. Back on Earth, the silence returned. But this time, it was different. The skies cleared slowly, revealing stars that had been hidden for days. The fires still burned, the ruins still stretched across continents, and billions of lives were gone. But humanity remained. Not united, not whole, but alive. In the weeks that followed, fragments of alien data were recovered from abandoned structures, damaged units, and disrupted transmissions. Most of it was incomprehensible. But one message appeared again and again, repeated across different systems, marked with the highest level of priority. A warning, not to humans, but about them. Translated imperfectly, it carried a meaning that sent chills through every scientist who read it. Avoid this species. Do not engage without full reassessment. Outcome uncertainty. Critical. That was how the invaders left Earth. Not with declarations, not with threats, but with caution. Because in the end, they hadn't been fighting a stronger enemy. They had been fighting a different one. And different was far more dangerous. Far beyond the solar system, the fleet carried that conclusion with them. It spread through their networks, their records, their understanding of the universe. Earth was no longer just another world. It was a marker, a boundary, a reminder. Because if a species like humanity could exist, fragile, divided, outmatched in every measurable way, yet still capable of resisting extinction through sheer will alone, then the universe was far less predictable than they had ever believed. And that made it dangerous. For everyone. Back on Earth, humanity began to rebuild. Slowly, painfully, but relentlessly. Because that was what humans did. They endured. They adapted. They continued. And somewhere, deep in the silence of space, a single conclusion echoed across civilizations that would never again look at Earth the same way. Humans weren't the strongest species. They weren't the most advanced. But they were something far worse. They were the species that refused to stop. And in a universe built on rules, that made them the real nightmare.